Hello YouTube. Today I will describe time travel with mirrors and why research by Soviet astrophysicist Nikolai Kozyrev is still classified. Panic, unconscious horror, dizziness, and the feeling of leaving the body. This is what those people who were engaged in the experiments with the Kozyrev mirrors in the USSR actually felt during the experiment. And after the first experiments, it became clear a time traveler must have excellent health and strong nerves. Mirrors have long been considered a window to another world. The ancient Slavs had a ban on sleeping and at the same time being reflected in the mirror. People were afraid that the human soul might go to another world and not return. Until now, modern school children and students are puzzled and mystically afraid of the claim that the image in the mirror does not exist until there is an observer, a person or a camera. And then the image of light rays reflected from the mirror surface will be formed in the brain or on a sensitive matrix. Well, Nikolai Kozyrev believed the world through the looking glass really exists, and the time inside it changes the vector and goes in the opposite direction. He believed that the time is a special kind of energy and developed the idea of causative mechanics, according to which time is expressed in causative relationships. They are always separated from each other in space and do not depend on the coordinate system. According to this theory, the energy of time feeds the stars, and therefore the nuclear fusion inside them never stops. In different parts of the universe, time has a different density, activity, and all physical processes in the universe occur with the absorption or allocation of time. Kozyrev believed that the time is a substance to which information is transmitted instantly to all points of the universe. This was proved by an experiment with distant stars. The light that traveled from them to Earth for years or hundreds of years was captured by a telescope and plunged scientists into the past. But they saw what happened many years ago. But it turned out that if you point the telescope at the place where the star is calculated to be in the present, the devices detect small deviation. That is, in fact, they penetrate into the future. Kozyrev pointed out that a similar interaction occurs between time and the human brain. This is why there are such concepts as intuition or foresight. In some cases, a person can look into the future and learn it. And a special system of concave mirrors can help her or him in this. In the USSR, Kozyrev's ideas were not appreciated, and his causative mechanics was declared to be a pseudoscience. However, this did not happen immediately, but after a series of allegedly unsuccessful experiments. We need to understand that the Russian scientist's colleagues did not accept his scientific papers. Despite this, the scientist has repeatedly stated in his speeches that time is the basis of all processes in our universe. In particular, Kozyrev claimed that all events that occur around us are carried out with the absorption or allocation of time, and in the last years of his life, Nikolai Kozyrev devoted himself to working on the creation of a time machine, but he did not have time to complete his project. So what are those Kozyrev's mirrors? These structures are called mirrors conditionally. These are mainly aluminum structures made in the form of a spiral, which according to the scientists can reflect physical time and can also focus certain types of radiation, like lenses. These emitters can also be biological objects. The most common design with which the greatest number of experiments were conducted is a mirror sheet of polished aluminum, which is rolled in a special way in the form of a spiral of 1.5 turns clockwise. A volunteer chair and special equipment are placed inside the structure. A helmet like a pen with sensor is put on the head of the volunteer. Many experiments were conducted in the early 1990s of the last century, in particular experiments on ESP. The results of the experiments are not entirely clear. For example, volunteers placed inside these spirals experienced a variety of abnormal sensations, such as leaving the body, telekinesis, telepathy, and transmitting thoughts at a distance. All this is recorded in detail in the research protocols. One of the goals was to study a person's clairvoyant abilities and train these abilities to foresee the future, to be able to investigate the events of the past. These abilities, according to the study, increased dramatically inside a room of curved metal mirrors. According to Kozyrev's theory, time changed its density inside his mirrors, which caused an increase in extra-sensitive perception, like ESP. Interesting stories were told by those who stayed inside the mirrored cameras for several hours. They began to feel like direct participants in historical events that they read about in school textbooks. Right in front of them unfolded certain events, familiar and unfamiliar actions and characters. They saw all this as if on a big movie screen. How all this happens remains a mystery. The mechanism of action of Kozyrev mirrors on human consciousness and time is not yet known and has only just begun to be studied. It is difficult to say whether the subjects are transported in time or the events of those times are broadcast before the subject in the present. So based on his work, scientists from Novosibirsk, that's a scientific city for the most part in Siberia, they created an installation that according to their plans was supposed to reflect time. It was given the name Kozyrev's mirrors. Subsequent experiments with this setup confirmed the fact that information about an event that has not yet occurred can be anticipated and transmitted. The fact that the experiments with the movement of human consciousness in time were conducted in the USSR became known only at the end of the 20th century. Again, a number of Novosibirsk scientists tried to repeat them in December 1990 in the remote polar village of Dixon. They assembled a system of Kozyrev mirrors and conducted a series of experiments to transmit mental images over a distance. And they found that the subject placed in the same system of mirrors on the Russian mainland receives about a third of the images correctly. Another third of the images arrived on the mainland with a delay of 5 to 7 hours, and a third was completely lost. The scientists themselves said that when the mirror system was assembled, they could not go inside for a whole day, for the entire day. They were prevented by the fear that all the subjects had experienced. Only 24 hours later, the most courageous of the experimentalists managed to take place inside the system. Eyewitnesses said that the aurora borealis appeared in the sky above the laboratory during the experiments. All the subjects began to feel bad. They had dizziness, nausea, increased or decreased blood pressure. They could not cope with the horror. They began to have headaches. At the same time, some experienced a feeling of leaving their body, while others actually saw some fragmentary pictures, more often from the past. They observed themselves from the outside, heard the voices of people from their childhood. Each time the experiments had to be interrupted due to those who were doing experiments, poor health. Things got even worse when it was decided to hold a communication session with the British colleagues. Russian scientists passed them mental images of various signs. The British received 96% of the information, but at the same time invented, so to say, another 70 similar characters. But the real shenanigans began when the system started to make various mystical signs depicted on paper. Eyewitnesses even saw a UFO over the roof of the laboratory and a glow coming from the system of mirrors. The experiments were interrupted because there was some danger in their continuation, but they will be resumed sometime soon, and we'll be able to find out, hopefully, all the secrets that the Kozyrev mirrors keep in them. And maybe even the first time machine will be designed to travel to the past or future, as you can see in science fiction films. After all, many things that were previously considered to be fiction, well, they have become our usual everyday reality. But were the Soviet academicians right when they declared Kozyrev's causative mechanics a pseudoscience and banned experiments with mirrors? To answer this question, we take a small trip to the past. Well, born in St. Petersburg, Soviet astrophysicist Nikolai Kozyrev worked at the Pulkovo Observatory. He started work there right after finishing postgraduate studies in 1931. Kozyrev's first scientific work was published when he was 17 years old, and other scientists were delighted with the depth and clarity of his logic. His main work is related to astrophysics. He studied the atmospheres of the sun and other stars, the phenomenon of solar eclipses, and the balance of radiation. By the age of 20, he graduated from the Leningrad University and received a degree on physics and mathematics. By the age of 28, Kozyrev was widely known as an outstanding astronomer, and he was teaching at several educational institutions. Although this may seem improbable to most people, Kozyrev showed that by shaking, rotating, heating, cooling, vibrating, or destroying physical objects, their weight can be increased or decreased by a small but measurable amount. And this is just one aspect of his remarkable work. The universe can be expanded. This statement belongs to Nikolai Kozyrev. It largely influenced the fate of the scientist. The conviction of this possibility was the reason for Kozyrev's arrest and sentencing. In 1936, he was arrested and convicted on strange charges. The scientist was charged with believing in the theory of the expansion of the universe, for considering Yesenin and Gumilev as worthwhile Russian poets. So that you know, one of them was executed by communists in 1921, and the other, Yesenin, had an American movie star for a wife, who was suspected of being an enemy and most likely murdered, but this was disguised as suicide. Anyway, another claim was that Kozyrev was accused of going to steal the mighty Volga River to the west. Yeah, like, take the river, give it to the west. This was Soviet socialism as in its best, so to say. This is what we had to live under. Okay? Fortunately, after the Gulag prison time spent, he was not sent to serve his full term in the concentration camps, but worked as a geophysicist in Norilsk and Nizhnya Tunguska. And by the way, for those who are interested in Russian paranormal history, this is where the Tunguska phenomenon took place in 1908. 3 months after his release, Kozyrev became a doctor of sciences in the theory of the internal structure of stars. Until 1958, he worked at the Crimean Observatory, and after his rehabilitation, so to say, in Soviet terms, he returned to the Pulkovo Observatory. The astrophysicist spent 10 years in captivity. all these years, Kozyrev formulated the main points of his own theory in his head. Nikolai Kozyrev believed that the reactions that occur inside stars are not only source of stellar energy. In other words, the stars acted as a machine that processed an unknown type of energy. The astrophysicist suggested that this resource appears due to the energy of time scattered throughout the universe. It is characterized by increased activity and is able to form in large quantities in certain places. Kozyrev came to the conclusion that time is material because inside the stars, as a result of gravity, it turns into matter. And in the course of thermonuclear fusion, matter burns up. It was the continuity of this process that prompted the scientists to this idea. Nikolai Kozyrev was convinced that a person could create an installation that could manage time, thereby enabling him or her to travel to the past and to the future. Reflections and calculations on this subject have led to Kozyrev's mirrors. He put forward the theory that in a mirror world, time goes in the opposite direction. Kozyrev was convinced that the world through the looking glass really exists. He knew that in the mid-1800s, Louis Pasteur discovered that the building blocks of life, known as protoplasm, are not essentially symmetrical, and that colonies of microbes grow in a spiral structure. The same expanding proportions are embedded in the structure of plants, insects, animals, and people. As a result of observation in area where he served his sentence as the enemy of the people, Kozyrev realized that in addition to the usual waves of acquiring energy through food, drink, respiration, and photosynthesis, all life forms draw energy from an invisible spiral source. Kozyrev put forward the theory that the direction of the spiral growth of the shell and on which side of the human body the heart is located is determined by the direction of the energy flow. If somewhere in space-time there was a place where the energy flow spiraled in the opposite direction, then he would expect that the cells would grow in the opposite direction and the heart would be on the opposite side of the body. When Kozyrev was finally set free in 1948, so to say, and was able to return to his research, he made many advanced predictions about the Moon, Venus, and Mars, which were later confirmed by Soviet spaceships. This earned him fame as the pioneer of the Soviet space race. In 1958, Kozyrev again shocked the world by claiming that the Moon was showing volcanic activity in the Alphonsus crater. If this is true, which most astronomers and scientists absolutely refuse to believe, then the Moon has a huge natural resources and energy sources. I think that modern space explorers and Silicon Valley oligarchs, so to say, understand that Kozyrev was right. As we have said, spiral energy patterns in nature were revealed to Kozyrev's eyes when he was a prisoner. He realized that the spiral energy is actually the true nature and manifestation of time. Obviously, he felt that time as we know it was much more than a junction of duration. Kozyrev insisted that if we try to think about the reason for the existence of time, about something tangible and identifiable in the universe that can be linked to time, we know that due to orbital patterns of the Earth and the solar systems, we can trace a complex spiral pattern in space. One day I need to get back to the spiral research of my own, based on the ideas of Ivan Yefremov, that mysterious Soviet scientist who was thought to be extraterrestrial by the KGB. And in my channel, in the playlist, you can find all about Yefremov. But I did my own research too in Southern Africa, in Yucatan, a few other places, and I have my own ideas. I'll present them some other day. But remember it, this spiral development. And also, on May 29, 1919, this was when a total solar eclipse was used to test the Albert Einstein's revolutionary theory of gravity, known as general relativity. Einstein himself was relatively unknown at the time. He had proposed general relativity in 1915, and scientists had been intrigued by the entirely new way of thinking about gravity. For example, the idea that mass causes space to curve, but no one had proven Einstein correct. Then on May 29, 1919, an expedition of English scientists traveled to the island of Principe of the west coast of Africa to observe a total solar eclipse. The scientists' measurements during the eclipse showed that astoundingly, Einstein's predictions were correct. Stars could be seen at the edge of the sun during the eclipse, while the moon blocked the sun's light. The stars' locations appeared displaced because their light had to travel to us, not on a straight path, but on the curved space around the sun, as described by Einstein. So it took Einstein to figure out gravity's true modus operandi. Gravity, Einstein showed, did not just make what goes up always come down. Gravity made the universe go around. Einstein discovered that gravity is not a force but a curvature. But now let's get back to the research by Kozyrev. The Russian scientist's scientific discoveries are indisputable and recognized. Kozyrev developed the theory of extended stellar atmospheres and discovered the feature of stellar radiation. Developed the theory of sunspots, assuming that they are balanced by the surrounding photosphere. Discovered hydrogen in the atmosphere of Mercury and nitrogen on Venus. Discovered emissions of hydrogen and carbon from under the surface of the moon, which indicated volcanic activity under the surface of our satellite. Previously, it was believed that volcanoes on the moon have been silent for 1 billion years. Many years ago, a report by Professor Kozyrev of the Pulkovo Observatory was published in the Proceedings of Moscow University, which struck the imagination with the paradoxical nature of its conclusions, not only for the people who are ignorant about such things, but also for specialists. Since Nikolai Kozyrev was an astronomer and his main specialty, at first he was talking about purely astronomical things. The moon has long been considered a dead celestial body that has already completed its evolution. And suddenly there was a scientist who publicly declared, on this natural satellite of the Earth, volcanic activity is quite possible. He was criticized, to put it mildly, by his colleagues for such anti-scientific statement. However, the scientific world was surprised when in 1958 Kozyrev observed a volcanic eruption in the crater Alphonsus with his telescope and even managed to get its spectrogram. It took a good 10 years before Kozyrev's observations were recognized as completely reliable. Only in December 1969, the State Committee for Discoveries and Inventions of the USSR gave the scientist a diploma for the discovery of lunar volcanism. And the following year, the International Astronomical Academy awarded him a personalized gold medal with a diamond image of the constellation Ursa Major. So the fact remains that there is a volcanism on the moon, and there's nothing to be done about it. However, many skeptics could not calm down. Kozyrev came to his discovery in a very unusual way. The fact that Nikolai Kozyrev believed that the basis of lunar volcanism should be found in the flow of time. Kozyrev also predicted that the moon's lack of a magnetic field and a high temperature, also up to 200,000 degrees Kelvin inside Jupiter. In 1970, he was awarded, as I said, the gold medal of the International Academy of Astronautics. And suddenly such a venerable scientist developed a pseudoscience in which he allowed the discovery of a clairvoyant in every person, somehow one does not fit with the other. Well, that fit is completely different. We can assume that Kozyrev really managed to achieve amazing results in his experiments. Results that surprised and quite fairly frightened the Soviet leadership. Most likely, therefore, the results of his experiments, as well as the documentation on the Kozyrev's mirror system, were classified and concealed so that something unexpected does not happen in the Soviet Union. Okay? Kozyrev himself was fired from the observatory, and he barely managed to find a position as a minor consultant. A few years later, the scientist died. Most likely, the system used in their experiments by Novosibirsk scientists, Englishmen, and other experimentalists has some flaw that led everyone who tried to experiment with the time, it led them to the field of esoteric, but not to science. Again, his documents, his research is still classified. It is even possible that the erroneous technical drawings that the scientists used in 1990 were deliberately placed by the KGB as a distraction from the real time machine of Kozyrev. Obviously, Kozyrev's genius will still be appreciated, if not by our contemporaries, then perhaps by our descendants, who will finally be able to get to the secret archives of the KGB, Soviet secret police, and see the real drawings of the astrophysicists. And then who knows, maybe they will visit in the distant visit us in the distant 21st century. Who knows? And our descendants will be surprised by the antiquated iPhones that we use, and maybe they'll sigh and say, how did they live with such primitive technologies? Who knows? First, those archives have to open. Kozyrev's mirrors are still little known, but the invention of the 20th century, this invention can be called a kind of a time machine, an attempt to penetrate the past or the future. The effects that are obtained when screening space using mirrors have not yet been studied and explained. Those strange constructions that change time, Kozyrev's mirrors. This is one of the most inexplicable concepts in philosophy and physics. It is possible that the further study of the phenomenon of Kozyrev's mirrors will bring us closer to understanding it. But let's try to see how Kozyrev viewed time. For the start, let us examine the principle of Kozyrev mirrors' cylindrical or ovoid shape. Although the principle is like mirrors and other structures, spiral mirrors, but each example has its own nuances. If we try to explain the essence of this phenomenon in a few words, using the generally accepted concepts of modern humanity, we can say the following. Kozyrev's mirrors concentrate dark matter in their volume. The increased concentration of this matter contributes to the saturation of the aura, otherwise life force, called life force, of a person. Additional saturation of this aura allows some people to move to new levels of perception of reality, to see the past and future, to find answers to questions of interest, and to feel better. Now let us see how this happens. But first let us remember what dark matter is and why its resistance can be considered a proven fact. Based on modern calculations of celestial mechanics, a branch of astronomy that applies the laws of mechanics to study the movement of celestial bodies, it turned out that in order for all cosmic objects, planets, stars, galaxies, to move in space as they do now, the universe must be filled with some unknown matter, dark matter, the mass of which, according to approximate calculations, is about 90% of the total mass in the universe. In other words, all the physical matter we distinguish is just the tip of the iceberg, the vast majority of which is hidden outside the perception zone of our senses and technical devices. Dark matter literally permeates our world and our bodies, but we do not notice this, as we do not notice many other material processes. For example, harmful radiation for us. To explain the principle of operation of Kozyrev mirrors, compare them with a pit or a hole on the road and a dark matter with water that flows into this pit. In the case of a real pit, water flows into the volume of the depression because there's a certain difference in the level of the solid surface between the road and the bottom of the pit. The difference is the level of a solid surface is for water a difference in the qualities of the external environment that cause water to move in a certain way. A similar difference in the qualities of the external environment is formed by the Kozyrev mirrors, which makes dark matter move in a certain way. How exactly dark matter moves in such conditions reveals the nature of the rotation of the planets. The difference in quality, in the curvature of the planet's space creates conditions under which dark matter begins to swirl like a funnel which rotates the planet, filling the curvature of space in parallel. At the level of the microcosm, this is manifested in the rotation or redistribution of electrons in their orbits. Similar processes occur in the oceans. The difference in water quality, otherwise the difference in its temperature, creates whirlpools. On land, the difference in air quality, again, its temperature difference, creates eddies and tornadoes. Professor Kozyrev started designing a time machine. During his imprisonment in the Gulag concentration camps in the Soviet Union prison. To complete the calculations, he lacked knowledge of certain astronomical quantities. But where could they be found in a prison? Listen, having got into this hopeless situation, Nikolai Kozyrev, for the first time in his life, turned to God with such a request for help. And after several days of prayer, an astronomical reference book fell at Kozyrev's feet in his cell. This may have been kind of a joke by the prison warden, but whatever it was, the book was taken back by him too quickly, by the warden. This was stated in Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago book. But Kozyrev had some time to look at the pages of the book and read it. In any case, this is how the concentration camp legends described these events. I remember reading the book and how the story deeply moved me in those years, having escaped from the USSR. I did my best, living in the West, to smuggle Solzhenitsyn's works into the Soviet Union and other works. But I also read voraciously, and back then I didn't know about the mirrors that Kozyrev created. Almost no one knew in the Soviet Union. But you see here in front of you, this was another distinguished Russian scientist whose ideas can change the world one day. And he paid for his ideas with a prison sentence. Well, I will continue to tell you interesting hypotheses and theories proposed by Soviet and Russian scientists and others who lived in the USSR, because they're very interesting. But the Kozyrev's mirrors, for those who are interested in the whole time machine idea, this is something to start with too. And I have other videos on the subject. If you like my research and can help me, please look at the description in the for this video, and you will find ways to do so. I really appreciate all your support, and I ask that you subscribe to my channel, share it with others, and hopefully I'll bring you more videos soon. Thank you.